Let's continue a magical morning with the Director of Neurology at Waikato. Is that how you pronounce it? Waikato? Waikato. There you go. Waikato Hospital in New Zealand. Our next speaker and his team conducted the world's first randomized trials involving a ketogenic diet in people with both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, as well as the first published application of a fasting and ketogenic diet protocol in people with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and Huntington's disease. He is currently conducting a clinical trial in Glioblastoma, which combines standard treatments with fasting and ketogenic diets for patients with advanced cancer. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Matthew Phillips.
Thank you for that, and thank you for inviting me to PHC 2025. So my name is Matthew Phillips, and I'm going to be speaking about mitochondria, terrain, and cancer. Bit of background, I'm a clinical neurologist and the director of neurology at Waikato Hospital in New Zealand. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in biology, which I obtained from Queen's University at Kingston in Canada. I have an MD, of course, and most of my neurology training was done at the Royal Melbourne Hospital in Australia. I have no disclosures and no conflicts of interest. I'm going to prelude this talk with a quote, an ancient Buddhist quote about the middle way. It's been said that the middle way is not a compromise, but rather a harmony where extremes dissolve into wisdom. Keeping this in mind, what it means is that rather than polarizing our thinking to adopt one of two opposing views in the approach to any problem, we can transcend this duality, this either-or mindset. We may find a wiser and more practical approach that allows us to have real and innovative solutions. So this talk, bearing this middle way in mind, we'll discuss three things. The first is this idea of a mito-centric terrain-oriented approach to health. In about 10 minutes, you'll know what I mean by that. The second thing is rationale for applying ketogenic metabolic therapy in cancer. Some overlap with the previous talks, but a little bit of new stuff. And I'll discuss, perhaps most importantly, results from applying ketogenic metabolic therapy in glioblastoma, which is the most common primary aggressive brain tumor. And I'll focus on our own work because I know it the best and it's been a bit of a journey. Okay, so first, a mitocentric terrain-oriented approach to health. What is that? We live in a cell-centric world. Okay? The reason for this is that cells were discovered long ago, almost 400 years ago, and this has provided centuries to lay down a firm foundation for what we call cell theory. This has three main tenets. First, all organisms are composed of one or more cells. Cells are the basic unit of these organisms, so the basic unit of complex life, essentially, and all cells arose from pre-existing cells or arise from pre-existing cells. Now, this theory was reinforced by the discovery of the cell nucleus about 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and this discovery provided visible evidence of a master coordinator or an apparent master coordinator of all cell processes. Cell theory was essentially complete by the mid-1800s. Now, this was very important because cell theory paved the way for something called germ theory. This is Louis Pasteur, a hero of mine when I was a kid. He's now my second favorite hero. Third, maybe, after Professor Siegfried. So, the completion of cell theory in the mid-1800s was very timely for Louis Pasteur. It provided a platform upon which he was able to champion germ theory, and he was a French scientist. Germ theory was, and remains, a disease-centric theory. It emphasized external pathogens such as bacteria as disruptive to cells, the fundamental unit of life, and thus the origin of disease. Health could be achieved by targeting, suppressing, and eliminating the pathogens, thus enabling cells, the fundamental unit of life, to function normally. Germ theory was used in infectious diseases very successfully in the 1800s, but now it's spilled over beyond that. It pervades all of our thinking about what is disease and what is health. We're applying it to atherosclerosis, we're applying it to Alzheimer's, and we're applying it to cancer. There is another way, okay, a mitocentric perspective. Mitochondria, unfortunately, were only discovered later, much later, during the 1850s compared to cell theory, which was discovered in the mid-1600s. Okay? And they were not even formally named. It took a few decades for these guys to figure out what exactly we were looking at and what to call them. around 1898. So this provided much less time to develop a mitocentric theory. We've only had just over 100 years that we've really known about mitochondria. Mitochondrial roles are much less visible to microscopy, the main tools they used to look at these things in the 16, 17, 1800s. So eventually in the mid-1900s, not even 100 years ago, it was found that they generate most of the cell's energy, and this has earned them the nickname of cell powerhouses. So what I learned in high school, probably most of you did. But we were only recently discovering they do a lot more than generate energy. They coordinate the flow of that energy. Okay? Multiple signaling pathways are involved in that coordination. So they do it through metabolites. They do it for reactive oxygen species, or ROS. They do it through calcium signaling, hormonal signaling, and others. Very importantly, we're just recently discovering that mitochondria influence gene expression by the nucleus. They actually have an influence on the majority of genes in the nucleus that we know of so far. And for this reason, they have now been nicknamed as cell processes. It's a much better name. It was coined by Dr. Martin Picard's team, a mitochondria specialist out of Columbia University in New York. And this is the way that I think they should be thought of. We are now entering a mitocentric world. We're just on the threshold of this world. Okay? The old cell-centric world has been around for centuries. This is an exciting time. Current research is just recognizing the highly complex and interactive nature of mitochondria. They comprise a vast social network, so both within and without the cells. So there's several hundred of these things within each cell, and which indicates that they are highly social organelles. They come together, they split apart, and they move around, they communicate in many levels. They can even move between and exist without cells. So, and no other organelle in the cell can do this. So they can go from one cell to another through tunneling nanotubes or through extracellular vesicles. And they can even float freely in the bloodstream, for example. These are called cell-free mitochondria. They don't need cells to survive. Based on all these features in the last two slides, it's reasonable to consider mitochondria as the basic units of complex life, rather than cells. It's a total mind flip. And mitochondria as the master coordinators of the cell, rather than the cells, just being an organelle that's attached to the cell and generates energy for the cell. Maybe these are the master coordinators, rather than the nucleus. And I think a lot of the evidence from Professor Seyfried's talk would support that. And this was the missing core of what is known as terrain theory. And this is my other hero, other than Pasteur now. This emerging mitocentric perspective would really have aided this fellow, Antoine Béchamp, because he proposed this thing called terrain or host theory in the 1800s. The same time when Pasteur was championing germ theory. They actually had a debate that lasted a couple of decades. Now, Béchamp was different. He was not only a scientist, he was also a medical doctor. He proposed a health-centric theory. Terrain theory was a health-centric theory, and this emphasized an internal tissue dysfunction as the origin of disease. So he saw most pathogens as simply scavengers, and the scavengers were there as the result of a weakened terrain. They weren't the cause. They were there because the terrain was weak. Health could be achieved through restoring and healing the terrain. Crucially, he had no target. He had no core. He tried to make one up called microzymas. He thought these were these fundamental particles of life that could basically be indestructible and sort of give rise to many more complex forms. I think he was probably a bit desperate, but they had some features similar to mitochondria, to be honest, but there were a lot of things that he said he just couldn't provide evidence for. So he lost this debate against Pasteur in the 1800s. Terrain theory does really need to re-enter our thinking, though. Now that we know about mitochondria, we don't need microzymas or any of this other stuff. We can actually create a better terrain theory, okay? So this is a fascinating time, this new mitocentric world. We actually have a chance to make a really good terrain theory, something that lasts. So let's contrast these two approaches to health. On the left, we have cell-centric, germ-oriented theory that basically is the dogma today that dominates medical care. By this theory, cells coordinate mitochondria. They're just organelles that are attached to the cell. This theory emphasizes the visible, such as the big nucleus sitting there. By this theory, disease is caused by pathogens that must be targeted, suppressed, and eliminated. It's a very aggressive kind of approach to medicine. On the other hand, we could introduce a mitocentric terrain-oriented theory. By this theory, mitochondria coordinate cells. This theory emphasizes the hidden, okay? Energy, not only its generation, but its coordination and flow. This theory says that disease emerges from impaired mitochondrial biology. So not just mitochondrial dysfunction, but impairments along many levels of their individual metabolism and also sort of population-wide health. And mitochondria essentially represent the terrain. So impaired mitochondrial biology is a weakened terrain. And this has to be restored or healed. Now, realistically, both approaches can be useful. Okay, there's no denying germ theory was very useful in the 1800s against infectious diseases. So it depends on the situation. But we have to be fluid in our thinking and not polarize in this incessant need to just put yourself in one camp and stand on that hill until you die. Okay, you don't need to do that. We can transcend duality. That said, right now the balance is way off. We need way more mito-centric, terrain-oriented approaches in healthcare, especially in cancer. Okay? This lays the groundwork for the rationale for applying ketogenic metabolic therapy in cancer specifically. I'm going to focus on fasting. That, to my mind, is the most powerful and the most essential. First, a word about standard treatments. Currently, standard of care, or SOC, in most advanced cancers involves a combination of surgery, radiotherapy, and chemotherapy. Broadly, these treatments aim to target, suppress, and eliminate cancer. Sounds familiar, right? By directly removing cancer cells through surgery, inducing oxidative damage, radiotherapy, and both radiotherapy and chemotherapy can disrupt DNA and so on. So basically, this is a very cell-centric, germ-oriented approach. We're treating cancer like a foreign invader, like some kind of pathogen. We just want to get rid of it. It's not working, right? You've seen the numbers. Now, the problem here is that cancer is, from a certain point of view, extremely complex, especially from a cell-centric, germ-oriented view. Last I looked, there were 14 or 15 hallmarks of cancer. It seems they're increasing them every couple of years. And these sort of denote the key features of this disorder. So you have deregulated cell metabolism, so that shift from oxidative phosphorylation back to substrate level phosphorylation as a primary means of generating energy. Some of these cells, especially the cancer stem cells, are able to resist cell death. Sustained proliferative signaling, so as Dr. Cooper showed, insulin and cousins are very high in the cancer state, and this is a problem. There's non-mutational epigenetic reprogramming, so epigenetics are reprogrammed to favor the cancer state. A lot of tumors are able to avoid immune targeting and destruction through various ways, especially glioblastoma. It's very good at that. There's tumor-promoting inflammation, there's altered microbiota, and so on. So quite simply, it's complicated from a cell-centric, germ-oriented point of view, and the standard treatments just can't cover all these bases. They don't even try. What we need is a synergistic therapy that treats the impaired mitochondrial biology that lies at the heart of many of these changes, as you've seen in previous talks. Okay, so this introduces us to ketogenic metabolic therapy, or KMT. Now, our modern lifestyles put us in constant physiological glucosis. It's glucosis. Most people are running on glucose with negligible ketone levels pretty much most, or if not all of the time. Okay, this is abnormal. This has sort of become normal in the last 100 years and somewhat normal in the last 10,000 years of agriculture. But for most of our evolution, even before we were Homo sapiens, for 2 to 3 million years, our hunter-gatherer ancestors were mostly in ketosis. And they ate intermittently, which involved lots of fasting. I'm providing references for all this. If you want to look them up, I consider these very good references. They nearly all ate a ketogenic or lowish carb diet. Now, not all. There were rare exceptions, such as the Hadza, eat a lot of carbs, but they have a ton of fiber coming in too, which, as we know, is protective against glucose spikes and other things. So if you look at this study from 15 years ago, still one of the best in my opinion, these guys looked at modern hunter-gatherers around the world, And the guys up in the tundra and the northern coniferous forests, they're eating a ketogenic diet. Okay? Their carbohydrate intake is extremely low. As you get closer to the equator, you introduce more carbs. So the people in the desert and grassland areas have the most carbs coming in, but it tops out at maybe 34%, very top. And so they're eating a lowish to moderate, I'd say lowish carb diet. And this is just a fact, and this is modern hunter-gatherers, okay? Now, another misconception about hunter-gatherers is that they all died young. That's not true. The modal age of death, and this is an excellent reference I give you here, was 72 years, which is the same as it is today if you look at the world modal age of death. Cancer was very rare in these people, and it is rare in modern hunter-gatherers. Okay? Over 90% of adults died of infections or homicide, war. Less than 10% died of the lifestyle disorders, cancer and heart disease and so on. So, KMTs are simply strategies that induce our natural state, and this adaptation may be helpful in cancer because cancer was so rare back then. The essence of KMT is very arguably fasting. Fasting is a strategy that involves abstaining from food for specified time periods, at least 12 hours, usually done water only. Can be done other ways, limited tea or coffee. I like to do it water and coffee because I'm a coffee fanatic. It can be intermittent, so such as 16 and 8, 16 hours daily of fasting, 8 hours daily of eating. You can do 20 and 4. TMAD, 2 meals a day. I like that because it's flexible. Or OMAD, 1 meal a day, so essentially 23 and 1. That's good because it's powerful and flexible. They can be prolonged. You can do fast 2 days or longer. That might be useful in certain cases, such as cancer treatment, as we'll see. Fasting is the purest of all ketogenic metabolic therapies. All the others generally aim to recapitulate its effects. And they go, as Dr. Cooper stated, beyond ketosis and beyond the ketones themselves. Very importantly, they induce a whole body shift to mitochondrial metabolism. So not just substrate level phosphorylation to oxidative phosphorylation, but I see them as giving mitochondria more control over the cell. And I call this the mito shift, the mitochondrial shift to oxidative to mitochondrial metabolism and control. This stresses cancer cells because they're running on SLP, substrate level phosphorylation mainly. It also facilitates mitochondrial recovery or mito recovery. I think this is a very underappreciated thing that we have to consider in cancer treatment because we can't just treat the tumor that is there. We have to keep that person healthy for decades and prevent recurrences. And they got the tumor for some reason in the first place. We have to create an environment that favors mito recovery and keep it that way. Now, I see the ketogenic diet as an accessory ketogenic metabolic therapy. It's very important, but it's an accessory to fasting. This is a very high fat, very low carb, adequate protein strategy. Shouldn't think of it as a diet. It's a strategy or a therapy, and they're very flexible, contrary to popular opinion. As people in this room probably know, they can be implemented as omnivore, carnivore, vegetarian. Arguments in favor of omnivore and carnivore, definitely, but I can work with people who are strongly vegetarian. One way to do it, and this came out just this year, is to have a sort of a meat-heavy omnivore approach. Would be meat at the base, and then green vegetables in the middle, and then at the top of this food pyramid, a few nuts and seeds. Now, nearly all pre-cultural diets were ketogenic or lowish carb, so nearly all of these diets can be modified to be ketogenic. So pretty much any cuisine is workable. Ketogenic diets, why are they an accessory to fasting? Because they mimic fasting. They're designed to mimic the fasted state, put the body into a fasting-like state, but also at the same time allow that body to acquire nutrients. Because of course when you're fasting, you can't acquire nutrients. This induces the mito shift, just like fasting does, but it's a more gradual and less pronounced manner. And it also facilitates mito recovery. Again, it's indirect and it's less pronounced than fasting. Still useful. Now, ketogenic metabolic therapy, like cancer, is also very complex. So when people say, they get turned off by the idea that it's just a fluffy diet strategy, that couldn't be anything further from the truth. This is a complicated therapy on a biochemical and physiological level. There's multiple mechanisms, hundreds. It can provide synergy with the standard treatments by covering multiple bases, okay? So if we look at these hallmarks of cancer, just to take an example, it can deal with that deregulated cell metabolism, mitochondrial metabolism, by shifting substrate level phosphorylation back to OXPHOS. It can elicit this thing called differential stress sensitization, which I'll talk about in a couple slides, which can make the killing of cancer cells easier, particularly for the standard treatments. It can help lower insulin and other growth factors. It can induce favorable epigenetic changes that don't favor the cancer state. It can enhance immune function, reduce inflammation, alter the microbiota, and so on. So it's very complex if you look at it through this lens. So KMT achieves this by inducing that mito shift, which stresses cancer cells because they can't deal with that mito shift very well. And it also facilitates mito recovery, particularly in the normal cells, if you're targeting the cancer cells with some other treatment. Okay? And you got to do this mito recovery thing. I think you have to incorporate it in long-term cancer care because this strengthens the terrain. And the terrain is where it's at if you want to prevent more cancer from coming later. Okay? This is what it's all about. The mitochondria lies at the heart of these changes, not the nucleus, which the Hallmarks of Cancer paper put there before. Now, I'll just mention a couple ways KMT can do this. Of course, it alters the glucose ketone index, the GKI term coined by Professor Seyfried's team several years ago now. So it targets the cancer reliance on substrate level phosphorylation through glycolysis. An older and less precise term for this is the Warburg effect. KMT lowers glucose, the primary fermentable fuel, while elevating ketones, which is not a viable fuel for cancer cells. Okay? It cannot sustain them in a proliferative state. There's no evidence that can occur at all. Now, most people run around, as I said earlier, high levels of glucose and very low, negligible levels of ketones, and they have a high GKI, somewhere in the 20s or 30s, so like 20x or 30x glucose levels compared to ketone levels. What we want when we get people into therapeutic ketosis, and someone with cancer, for example, is you want to try and get those bars really close, maybe even flip them. So you want the ketones to be high and you want the glucose to be low. This lowers your GKI, and that's what you want. How low do you want? Well, in animals, a GKI less than 6 is the minimum to slow tumor growth and improve survival. And as has been said, in humans, we probably want to get something under 2. So that paper by Dr. Durai and the rest of us that was put up is really making that recommendation. I think that that's probably correct in humans. So now, beyond targeting substrate level phosphorylation, this idea of starving cancer, which is very simplistic, I think, a lower GKI is an indicator of many other good things happening that will hinder cancer. Okay, so this idea of pleiotropic mechanisms, multiple mechanisms at many levels, it's when your GKI is lowered, you've got these other good things occurring. Okay, one of which is differential stress sensitization and resistance. This capacity for these two things. When you do a ketogenic metabolic therapy, especially fasting, it induces these two things. The differential stress sensitization means when nutrients are limited, cancer cells become more sensitive to stressors, all stressors, including chemo and radiation, and maybe we can take advantage of that. The impaired mitochondria produce more reactive oxygen species, and that's bad for the cancer mitochondria and the cancer cell in general because that's how they die when there's too many. They just can't handle it and they die. Now, at the same time, KMT induces differential stress resistance in normal cells. When nutrient levels are low, they become more resistant. They stop dividing, they hunker down, and their healthy mitochondria produce less reactive oxygen species. So this is a very important concept because I'm trying to work this differential stress sensitization and resistance concept very hard into our current approach to glioblastoma, as I'll show you. Now, in animals, combining the standard treatments of the fasting protocol slows tumor growth and improves survival more than either of these on their own. Okay, so the middle way, using both, trying to get the best of both worlds. This may enhance the tolerability and efficacy of the standard treatments in people. There's some pretty good evidence that it enhances tolerability, makes side effects from chemo and radiation and stuff less. Preliminary evidence that it improves treatment outcomes, but let's see. Third and final mechanism I'm going to describe to you about the rationale for KMT in cancer is that, but this is so important, it promotes mitochondrial repair and recalibration, strengthens the terrain. And if you don't do that, you're looking at your lens through which you're trying to treat cancer is very short-sighted. We got to look long-term. So KMT, especially fasting, can potentially repair and recalibrate the impaired mitochondrial biology that exists in these tumor cells. So it shifts substrate level phosphorylation to OXPHOS, which lowers reactive oxygen species production. It also boosts antioxidant levels, enhancing ROS clearance. Very importantly, these therapies can promote mitogenesis, so the birth of new mitochondria, and induce mitophagy, getting rid of the old junky ones. And I see it as a way to rebalance mitogenesis and mitophagy to really enhance the health of the entire mitochondrial pool throughout the body. This is crucial. Healthy mitochondria not only recover better from the standard treatments, they can also lower chronic inflammation. The mitochondria can lower chronic inflammation. They can enhance immune function, and they can suppress cancer gene expression. All of these things are crucial in the long term. So again, thinking long term with this terrain approach. Now, last, I'm going to talk about some results from applying ketogenic metabolic therapy in glioblastoma. I'm going to focus on our work because I know it really well, and it has been a journey. This all started in a case of metastatic thymoma, actually not a glioblastoma at all. And this led to a case report. So 8 years ago now, I saw a 37-year-old woman for follow-up of her myasthenia gravis. That's a neurological disorder. I was her neurologist for that. And she was devastated. She just told me a few days ago she'd been given a diagnosis of a terminal cancer coming from the thymus gland, which is up here in the neck. It was a metastatic thymoma, so stage 4, grade 4. And this led to a case report where she utilized KMT as a standalone treatment. Okay, so this is the CT scans, and top line is coronal view. So she's standing like I am, and that's her whole chest, and that's the tumor there. Obviously, it's between the size of a softball and a volleyball. This down here is an axial view. She's lying on a table with her feet coming out to you, and that's just a different angle. Now, she was offered palliative chemo. Surgery wasn't an option, nor was radiation. She declined that after our discussion. She was thinking about it, but she declined it after we talked. And instead opted for multimodal, so fasting plus keto diet, ketogenic metabolic therapy, as a standalone treatment. So it was comprised of prolonged fast. She did a 7-day fast every 1 to 2 months. She induced it with a 12-day fast right at the start. We decided to go for a big one. And then she did that every 1 to 2 months, and all the other days she did a keto diet. There's no intermittent fasting, just 3 meals a day keto diet. We measured her GKI, weight, adverse effects, tumor features. We always measure our glucose and ketone levels about 3 or 4 hours after bedtime, every day, as per Dr. Cooper has mentioned. And that's what we did. So what happened to her at the end of 2 years? She maintained a very low GKI of 1.4. She lost a lot of body weight, although she's regained most of that back since. Mild adverse effects really from these long fasts, mainly fatigue, cold intolerance, body aches. She was very happy to put up with those rather than put up with chemotherapy. And most importantly, the thymoma volume decreased by 96%. So those are her scans at the start and at the end of 2 years. There's just a sliver of this thymoma left. And she was told she was going to die by her oncologist, right? It was palliative. So I saw her just a week ago, a couple days before coming here. She's independent. She has a high quality of life 8 years later, and there's still a small part of the thymoma, and we've tried a number of things to see if we can, we even tried some other standard, not chemo or radiation, but other drugs to see if we can affect it. The only thing it seems to respond to is when she hunkers down on the fasting. Highly encouraging, but as a neurologist, the next step was to apply KMT to brain cancer. I was a little out of my comfort zone with thymoma. Okay, so this led to a case series that we did a few years ago now. In 2020, some of the oncologists became interested enough to refer patients to me for KMT. Just tweaked their interest, and it was just a few of them, but it was a start. And this led to a prospective case series of 10 patients with IDH wild-type GBM. So every time I say GBM or glioblastoma now, it's the wild types. GBM, the definition changed 3 or 4 years ago. There were wild types and mutants. Okay, and mutants are now called astrocytomas. So Glioblastomas are what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk, and that's important because they have a worse prognosis than the astrocytomas. So here's an example of some of the scans, just to give you a feel for the diversity. So these are axials, patients' feet were coming out at you. This one was in the left frontal lobe, crossing the midline a little bit. This one's in the left temporal lobe mainly, right parietal lobe, and this one was subcortical non-operable, involving the thalamus and other subcortical structures. These patients were advanced, okay? So basically, these were patients that went to their oncologist. They were like asking their oncologist, is there anything I can do? And the oncologist was like, okay, well, maybe, this is crazy neurologist. Well, I'll refer you to him. These were all guys who were 5 to 6 months post-biopsy. Most of them were inoperable anyways, or palliative, and or had already experienced progression. So they were giving me their toughest cases, and what is arguably already the toughest of all cancers, arguably. So, okay, anyways, that was fine with me. So we applied multimodal KMT largely as a standalone treatment, okay, because they'd already done most of their chemoradiation anyways, and the ones that were palliative weren't even offered the standard treatment, so they didn't get anything. This was comprised of prolonged fast, which averaged to be about 6 days every 1 to 2 months with a keto diet. Measured GKI, weight, adverse effects, survival, and so on. By the end of 5 to 6 months, the patients maintained a mean GKI of 3.2. Not bad. I would have liked it lower, but if you look at the breakdown, the fasts got it down to about a 1, those prolonged fasts. The keto diet, I think it could have been better, but there were reasons for that maybe. Remember, they were very advanced patients, a lot of them disabled, so their GKI there was about a 5. When you averaged it out, 3.22. They lost 11% of body weight, so they normalized their BMI. I find this is the norm with these aggressive fasting protocols. People normalize their BMI because they're usually in the overweight range when they get diagnosed. And the adverse effects attributed to KMT, this is important for the oncologist and the patient, obviously, but they were all mild to moderate. So we use the CTCAE grading scale. Grades 1 and 2 is sort of mild to moderate. Anything that's considered serious is grade 3, 4, 5 is very serious. So that was good to see. And the median survival was 13 months. So look, the median survival at our hospital is 12 months. So I guess considering some of these guys were already palliative and all, inoperable and so on, not bad. I got to admit though, while we showed it was feasible and safe and we published it, there was I wasn't convinced myself of a survival benefit. I'm a skeptical personality by nature, so including my own work, especially my own work. So I was extremely disheartened, actually, and I took a long motorcycle ride, which was going to be a couple weeks on New Zealand's South Island, but it turned into a month. Now, Nietzsche said that all truly great thoughts are conceived while walking, but this is what Nietzsche had for a motorcycle, right? He had the velocycle, which sucks in my opinion. So I think if I had a velocycle, I would have walked too. Anyways, during that ride, it was a great ride, and upon reflection, I thought there were multiple reasons for the apparent lack of survival benefit. So I had to admit, they were advanced patients, right? Already 6 months post-diagnosis, and a lot of them not in the best state already. The GKI could have been lower. 3.22 was good, but not great, right? Needs to be under 2. Importantly, there was no treatment overlap. We didn't overlap their 6-day fasts with their chemo and radiation, so we couldn't induce this differential stress sensitization or resistance concept. And I thought that was potentially very important. Another thing I noticed, when they got a relapse, it was usually a couple days after we broke the 6-day fast. And that makes sense. There's like a regeneration that goes into the body when you break a long fast like that, and I think the tumors might be able to take advantage of that. There's some evidence for that. So anecdotally, I thought that was happening. And perhaps most importantly, they'd already had 5-6 months of standard chemo and radiation and all these things, and that wears the body down. That's half a year of treatment. And, maybe their mitochondria were already damaged a bit and making it even harder for mito recovery to occur. So, I had to admit there were a lot of things here that we could improve in the protocol. So I modified the KMT approach. And I let the oncologist know, please refer me people that are just diagnosed. Don't leave it. Don't treat ketogenic metabolic therapy as this last ditch effort when they're already, so far advanced to their treatment that you have nothing left to offer them. So they listened, And in late 2020, I was finally referred a 63-year-old woman with a newly diagnosed IDH wild-type GBM, and this led to a case report where we applied the standard treatments in conjunction with multimodal KMT in a very synergistic, strictly timed manner to try and take advantage of these other things. So this was her tumor, axial view at the top, right parietal lobe, glioblastoma, and then this is a side view here, sagittal view, and she's got a parietal tumor there. So she had a partial resection. They couldn't get it all out, but they got most of it out. 6 weeks of chemoradiation, which is standard. 6 months of chemotherapy alongside a strictly timed KMT program. And this was comprised of prolonged fast. So she did a 7-day fast each month for the 9 to 10 months of the standard treatments. And we overlapped the standard treatments with those fasts to maximize differential stress sensitization and resistance. So she would start the fast 3 days before the chemo or radiation, and then when we broke the fast, we made sure there was at least 2 or 3 days of chemo or radiation still ongoing to try and prevent this potential cancer rebound. That was the theory. And she also did intermittent fasting, so 2 meals a day, so up the power a bit there, and a ketogenic diet. We measured GKI, weight, adverse effects, tumor features, and so on. So what happened to her? By the end of 2 years, similar to the first patient. So she had a GKI of 1.84, very good, lost a lot of body weight, normalized her BMI, again, didn't go too low. Adverse effects were mild, fatigue, cold intolerance, diarrhea, and most importantly, the GBM that was there was no longer visible at the end of 2 years. Now you see in that top graph there, the GKI hovered between a 1 and a 2, just over a 2 for those first 2 years. So she did a really good job. It's human nature, once you do a really good job, you want to celebrate a little bit. So it started to creep up, but I think what made the major factor there was some couple of life stressors, unfortunate events that happened to her, triggered a sort of latent depression, and the GKI, she fell off piste a little bit more. When she did that, the tumor just very slowly started to come back. But there was a correlation, I guess. Doesn't prove causation, but it was a correlation. And the last 2 months, she decided to just go for it. And when she did that, the tumor grew very quickly. And she died at month 38. So still a long-term survivor. 3 months is termed long-term survival, because so few people make that. So it was encouraging enough when she was adherent, that tumor seemed to go away and be quiescent. So this has led to our current trial. More oncologists got involved, so now I have general support from our radiation and our medical oncologists, which is great. And so in 2021, we commenced our current clinical trial, which is still ongoing. The first patient's out to 4 years now. It applies the standard treatment protocol alongside a very intensive multimodal metabolic therapy program, is what we call it, in newly diagnosed IDH wild-type GBM patients. So again, only the toughest ones, the wild types. And we're doing this press pulse approach, which has been mentioned in Professor Seyfried's papers, and modifying it a little bit with the tools we have available. So it consists of prolonged fast. I've shortened it slightly to 5-day fast to make it more tolerable for people. These are overlapped with standard treatments still to maximize the differential stress sensitization and differential stress resistance. And they're covering the post-fast refeed. So when they refeed, there's always 2 or 3 more days of radiation or chemo or something coming in. And this is like our acute pulse. The press, so the acute pulse is applying a maximal mito shift, maximal metabolic pressure to the cancer cells, and hopefully facilitating maximal mito recovery. The intermittent fast and keto diet, we're using sort of alternating 2 meals a day and 1 meal a day, so keeping up a fairly stringent intermittent fasting protocol on all of the days. And that, of course, is a reasonably strong but flexible ketogenic diet. And that basically constitutes a chronic press. We're measuring multiple outcomes, and those include feasibility, safety, and efficacy. Okay, and if you want to see, it's been registered there for 5 years at the clinical trial site. The protocol is basically the most intensive metabolic protocol that I'm aware of that's ever been applied to GBM or any group of patients with advanced cancer. And we apply it in a strictly timed fashion to maximize synergy with the standard treatments. So after biopsy diagnosis, whether or not they get surgical resection, we have a lot of inoperables in this trial as well. They get concurrent chemoradiation for 6 weeks, so chemo plus radiation, standard. And during that time, we start it with a 5-day fast. We have another 5-day fast in the middle of that 6 weeks. And all of the days is a time-restricted keto diet. They get a plan. It tells them exactly when to, what meals to eat and so on. We have a 4-week break, which is standard. And then we have 6 months of adjuvant chemotherapy. This consists of 6 5-day fasts. They get 5 days of chemo every 4 weeks. And during that 5 days of chemo, they get a 5-day fast layering in that, basically trying to create an acute pulse every time. And all of the days they do the time-restricted keto diet. Once the standard protocol is completed, that's like 9 to 10 months later, then the oncologist just, implements additional treatments as they would for anyone at their discretion. And so we don't interfere with their protocol at all, okay? And once the MTP is completed, I sit down with the patients and say, what do you want to do? And, of course, the vast majority of them continue their time-restricted keto diet. There's a small handful that go time-restricted low carb. Everyone sticks to the fasting, everyone, okay? So they don't all stick to the keto diet. Some of them go low carb. And they can modify it at that point too. Some of them go Mediterranean keto. Some of them go like, one couple Maori keto. A couple of them seen a lot of Dr. Chafee's YouTube videos and have gone carnivore keto. So it's a mixed bag, but that's okay. So prelim results, I can't get too into this. I don't think it'd be ethical to get ahead of the data. But look, we were aiming for 18 to 22 patients. At the 18 mark, spoke to my statistician and said, look, we got enough statistical power. We're good. We don't need any more. And regarding the feasibility and safety, all I'll say is that we are definitely sustaining that therapeutic GKI in the 1 to 2 range during the chemoradiation and break, so 10 weeks. And it elevates a little, which is normal once these people lose body weight and stuff. It's between 2 and 3 during chemotherapy. I won't give the exact numbers. We'll save that for the paper. All adverse effects attributed to the metabolic therapy program have been mild or moderate, and that's really good. All right, so again, grades 1 to 2. With the exception of weight loss, if you lose more than 20% body weight, it's technically a grade 3 event. But there's a lot of interesting things about the weight loss. First of all, the guys losing more weight than 20% are normalizing their body weight, so they were much bigger at the start. And there's an interesting effect on survival that I don't want to jump the gun and talk about too much now, but I'll mention it in the paper. We're measuring multiple efficacy outcomes, so performance status, exercise activity, quality of life, and of course survival outcomes with comparisons against a non-randomized internal control group, as well as expected survival and historical survival rates and so on. So going to compare that with along many levels. So look for a publication late next year. All I can say is let's be positive. There's reason to be positive. Okay, conclusions. Standard cancer treatments are cell-centric and germ-oriented. I think we have to integrate these with a mitocentric, terrain-oriented approach. KMT, especially fasting, works on many levels of cancer. The primary aim of this is to induce the mito shift, so that shift to mitochondrial metabolism and control of the cell, which stresses the cancer cells because they can't do that very well, and facilitate mito recovery and hopefully strengthen the terrain. Integrating the standard treatments with intensive multimodal KMT is feasible and safe in GBM, but I think we need more work to quantify the efficacy of this middle way approach. Stay tuned and wait and hope. I think there's light ahead. Those are my references.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. That's great.